they fixed it. LEGO Star Wars had a pretty rough Game Boy Advance port. Not to say that the game needed to carry over every mechanic from the console port, just it probably could have borrowed a little more to be less clunky and frustrating. LEGO Star Wars 2, the original Trilogy's port, does exactly that. Built on the same engine as the prior game, it cleans up nicely with the LEGO Death System, dropping studs on the feet and having a chance to regather them, a proper free play, extras including invincibility, the removal of the force meter, and even minikits, which bring it much closer to the main game. Griptonite did not develop this one, and few people involved in the first worked directly on it, despite a number of shared assets and working from the same base, instead being handled by Amaze Entertainment, which shared office space with Griptonite, and Griptonite would eventually be purchased by Amaze's parent company, merged together, and eventually die in 2009. As handheld versions of console games fell out of market relevance. Also, this game was released on 9/11. That's kind of funny. LEGO Star Wars 2 makes a lot of tweaks and improvements over the original game, while maintaining a lot of what it was. The most apparent change is that the isometric controls have been cleaned up to some extent, now featuring true controls, I guess you could call them, where up moves you up, right moves you right, and while it's certainly improvement over the prior game, the levels all being diagonally slanted makes it a little bit awkward, as you're usually holding the diagonals. The Saber Slash is also way smoother and faster, which makes the still wonky auto-aim much less of a problem, as your Jedi redirects their attacks more often, and you're way more likely to actually deflect attacks. The classes in general have seen some reworking, with Jedi all now inherently having high jump, but being unable to build anything. I guess because they hold their lightsabers, but it does get a bit irritating, as it's a flagrant way to prevent Jedi from getting every minikit alone. Gunners on the other hand can build, and auto-aim does seem to work a bit better for them now. In addition, Stormtroopers, Lando, and Gamorrean guards all have doors specific for them, although like the console game, disguises are implemented to get through Stormtrooper locks in a few select sections. There aren't really any solid classes beyond this. R2 still does the hover and hack, C-3PO and mouse droids are functionally useless, Boba Fett is a gunner with a jetpack, and the Rancor is a silly bonus. The game also actually features vehicle missions. They're pretty rough, featuring tank-controlled vehicles in isometric maps, which is exceedingly disorienting to play, and the ships have very few ways of interacting beyond shooting and getting shot from off-screen. Personally, I could have done without them, but I guess they do add a little variety. Thankfully, the game is made way less tedious by adapting the death system in the console games, where the only punishment for death is dropping studs, although because it would be impossible to miss getting them for the most part, whereas the games have pits and the like for them to fall into, some studs are inherently lost by default, which can make it a little bit difficult to grind through true Jedi. The game still mostly plays like a beat-em-up. Platforming is basically a non-entity, save for a few small one-jump sections, and while it's probably for the best, it makes the game pretty samey and repetitive. The game also has proper switching now, with AI-controlled companions that try their best to follow you and warp to you when they can't, and are actually a decent help in combat, which makes the game feel a little more lively. Free play also now operates like it did before, with freely selectable characters, although given there's basically only 5 classes, counting the door guys, that's not as impressive. One thing I love is that getting all the minikits in a level unlocks a character for purchase, usually a villain or another side character. It'd be appreciable to also get money, especially because the grind in this game is pretty rough and invincibility is very expensive. The game is stingy as hell and tedious to play, but it's a really nice reward for collecting. While not perfect, LEGO Star Wars 2 is a decent little isometric beat-em-up. It controls smoothly, plays well, and has most of the charm of the main game. Far from that game's quality for sure, but a decent little demake that captures the essentials of its superior version. LEGO Star Wars 2 is on much the same plane as its predecessor visually, even reusing several smaller assets. The prior game slideshows and screenshots have thankfully been traded up for little pantomimes of the plot, with speech bubbles that show different emotions and expressions to convey the story. These do tend to run a little long, the pacing is kinda slow, but they're charming enough to carry the game a little more than some screenshots of a cutscene. Backgrounds and characters are on roughly the same level as before, with simplistic digitizations of the 3D models from the main game, and even simpler backdrops to tie it together, and it still works decently well, capturing the charm of the characters and world in general. The sound is equally crusty with the first, with pretty rough renditions of the classic Star Wars music that are passable but not really arranged in a way to make them sound great. Recognizable, maybe not enjoyable. The addition of ship levels allows the games to land a little closer to their counterparts, although they still deviate on occasion, largely to reuse level assets, I assume. A New Hope begins on the Tantive 4, and the level shows off a few neat things the prior didn't have, like working elevators that sell the depth and layers better, and friendly NPCs. The game then hits Tatooine, which condenses both the Tatooine level and the Cantina, and reuses the Cantina hub that serves as a level select, which is pretty cute. Then there's the Death Star Rescue, which incorporates the disguises from the main game, and the Escape, which is the same level backwards. They really loved that trick in these games. Then it of course ends in the Death Star Trench Run. It's fairly rough. The isometric controls are a real struggle to wrap your head around, but also, the ship always chugs forward at a slow pace, which makes it even less pleasant. You can't really stop and think, you're always kind of trying to wiggle around to keep on course. Plus of course, enemy spam. I guess it's admirable they took a shot at it, but the results leave a little to be desired. As for the Empire Strikes Back, the Hoth battle is much the same as the prior level, but you also need to spiral around the AT-ATs. It's actually less bad, honestly. The snow speeders move much more slowly, which makes them feel a little less erratic, and you can kind of just wrap the AT-ATs up with the natural movement. The only goal is to knock them all over, which gets a bit tedious when you have to knock down like 15. The Hoth escape is fine if generic, and then there's the asteroid field. It's a ship level without enemies, or at least not very many of them. You just shoot rocks and fly to the end. How thrilling. Dagobah is skipped, which is honestly justifiable since even the console game needed to invent evil bats to fight and mostly focus on platforming. However, the two Cloud City levels are very samey, taking place, for a good majority anyway, on the same map with only a little extra to the finale for an unsurprisingly pretty bad Vader fight, which is basically another mash-off. The boss fights have not been improved at all. Return of the Jedi has 6 levels, but it sure doesn't feel like it, as the levels are all really something. Jabba's Palace lasts about 30 seconds. You bait the Rancor into the gate, you crush it, and it ends. There's almost nothing to say about it. It's funny that it's so narrow that free play has to let you wander around the cutscene to give you minikits to find. The top of the skiffs isn't much better. You make 2 jumps, fight Boba Fett by using the Force to knock him down, slash him, and it ends in 2 minutes. The speeder bike chase is a series of hallways you drive down while holding the shoot button. Yippee, straight lines. The Endor battle is really something else. The map is huge, visually cluttered, and gives little direction. As Han Solo, it's not so bad, but once you're forced to be Wicket, who only has a melee attack, but unlike a lightsaber, it doesn't deflect anything, it gets tedious. The level also has some hilarious slowdown near the end, where Wicket needs to build traps to destroy 5 ATSTs, and these seemingly cause severe issues to the game's processing power, with the game becoming more and more playable with each one destroyed. Flying the Falcon and the Death Star is another set of hallways. The escape from the explosion is a little bit more exciting, but the vehicle missions just ain't great this time around. And finally, the ending is a rematch with Vader. You mash a lot, and then you fight the Emperor. You mash a lot. The levels aren't even terrible, they're all just incredibly short and basic, and the one that isn't is the most tedious one in the game by far. Despite kind of roasting it there, LEGO Star Wars 2, the original Trilogy's GBA conversion, is a really solid upgrade over the first. It smoothed out all the frustration that the first was very, very prone to, and came a lot closer to console parity. The game is tedious, even I gave up on the 100% grind because I saw others discussing the 15-hour grind to 5 million studs. It gets really repetitive, levels are a bit all over the place. The vehicle missions are respectably ambitious, but don't control fantastically. But the game succeeds enough at being a tiny version of LEGO Star Wars 2. It's cute, and at the time it would have been a passable LEGO experience on the go, although portable games are no longer as novel given, you know, the Switch. So it's definitely on the low end as far as modern appeal goes. It's a perfectly passable game and a step in the right direction, although I imagine a lot of its improvements are probably a nice benefit on later games more so than itself, as the DS would eventually allow gameplay that is closer still to the consoles, even if not exactly on par.